My name is Samuel. I'm 82 years old. I spent most of my life thinking I understood what evil was afraid of. Crosses, holy water, sacred prayers. I was wrong about all of it. And the truth I discovered changed how I see everything about this life and what comes after. Let me tell you what happened. I grew up in a small town in Louisiana, Catholic family. We went to Mass every Sunday. I became a deacon at 43 and served my parish for nearly 4 decades. I thought I knew the faith inside and out. But in 1991, something happened that showed me how little I actually understood about the spiritual war happening all around us. You see, our diocese brought in a visiting priest from Rome, Father Marco, I'll call him. He had worked directly under Father Gabriele Amorth, the chief exorcist of the Vatican. Father Marco was giving a private talk to clergy members about what he had witnessed during his years assisting with exorcisms. I was invited to attend. Honestly, I almost didn't go. I thought exorcism was something from medieval times, something the church kept around for tradition but rarely actually performed. I didn't know it at the time, but that night would be the beginning of a journey that would occupy the rest of my life. Father Marco stood at the front of that small room. There were maybe 15 of us. He spoke quietly, no drama. He simply described what he had seen. He told us about Father Amorth. This man had performed over 70,000 exorcisms before his death in 2016. That's not a mistake, 70,000. Father Amorth had documented everything. He wrote books, he gave interviews, he trained other priests. And what emerged from decades of this work was a pattern that nobody expected. Father Marco said something that night that I have never forgotten. He said there is one thing that produces a reaction in demons unlike anything else. Not holy water, not relics, not even the name of Christ in the immediate moment. It was the mention of one specific event, the Day of Judgment. I sat there in that folding chair and felt something cold move through me. Not fear exactly, more like recognition. Like I had always known this was true, but had never let myself think about it clearly. Let me explain what Father Marco told us about what happens during an actual exorcism. The Hollywood version is garbage. Spinning heads, green vomit. That's entertainment. The real thing is different. A Catholic exorcism is a liturgical rite. It's structured. There are prayers, commands, scripture readings, the use of sacramentals like holy water and a crucifix. The priest speaks in the name of the church and in the name of Christ. He orders the entity to identify itself, to state its purpose, to leave the person it's afflicting. What happens in response varies enormously. Some people go silent, others become violently agitated. Some speak in voices that are clearly not their own. Some speak in languages they've never learned. Some display knowledge of hidden things they should have no way of knowing. Father Amorth was not a credulous man. He was rigorously trained in theology and in distinguishing genuine cases from mental illness. He worked alongside medical professionals. He rejected most people who came to him, concluding their problems were not supernatural in origin. So when he documented specific responses to specific things, he wasn't guessing. He was reporting what he observed over and over again in thousands of cases. And here's what I didn't understand then. Father Amorth documented what we might call a hierarchy of fear. Different things produced different responses. A crucifix produced a response. The name of Mary produced a response. The Eucharist produced an intense response. But none of these things produced the same level of what can only be described as terror that references to the Day of Judgment produced. You know what surprised me most? It wasn't that demons reacted to holy things. I expected that. What I didn't expect was the specific quality of their reaction to the final judgment. Father Marco described it to us that night. He said, when you mention the crucifix, demons resist. When you invoke the name of Christ, they rage. When you present the Eucharist, they recoil. But when you mention the Day of Judgment, something different happens. They panic. Not resistance, not aggression, panic. I was scared. After that night with Father Marco, I couldn't sleep properly for weeks. I kept thinking about what he had described, about these beings who know the truth completely and yet have chosen to oppose it permanently. Gabriele Amorth was born in Italy in 1925. He became a priest in 1954. For most of his priesthood, he worked in normal ministerial roles. But in 1986, he was assigned to work under Father Candido Amantini, the official exorcist of the Diocese of Rome. That's where everything changed. He trained directly under Amantini. He learned the rite of exorcism. He learned how to distinguish between psychological illness and what the Church calls genuine possession. When Amantini died, Amorth took over. He then founded the International Association of Exorcists, an organization that eventually grew to include hundreds of priests across multiple countries. He wrote 2 books that were widely read. An Exorcist Tells His Story, An Exorcist More Stories. In those books, he didn't sensationalize. He wrote with a calm, matter-of-fact tone that made the content even more shocking. He wasn't trying to scare anyone. He was reporting what he saw. And what he saw over those decades included a pattern that repeated over and over again. The mention of the final judgment produced a response in whatever was speaking through the afflicted person that was different from the response to anything else. I felt ashamed. Ashamed that I had spent decades in ministry without taking this seriously, without understanding the nature of the battle that surrounds us. Over the years after that first encounter, I sought out everything I could find on this subject. I read Father Amorth's books. I studied the works of Father José Antonio Fortea, a Spanish priest who has written extensively on demonology. I listened to talks by Father Chad Ripperger, an American exorcist, and they all pointed to the same thing. The Day of Judgment produces a specific and intense reaction because it represents something particular to these beings. It's the moment when their fate is permanently sealed, when there's no more ambiguity, no more delay, no more temporary freedom to roam and cause harm. Father Amorth wrote that demons exist in a certain sense, in a state of suspension. Their final punishment has not yet been fully executed. They are bound, in theological terms, but they have not yet been fully punished. They operate within limits they cannot exceed, but they still operate. They still have access to the world, to human beings. The Day of Judgment changes that permanently. It is the moment when final sentencing is handed down and there's no appeal. No more delays. No more chances for anything. That is what demons fear. Not the power confronting them in the moment, but the end of the story. I didn't know what to do with this information at first. It sat heavy on me. For months I would wake up at 3 in the morning thinking about it. You see, several exorcists have pointed out that demons seem to have access to a kind of knowledge about the spiritual order of reality that goes beyond what humans naturally perceive. When commanded to tell the truth, they confirm things that from a purely naturalistic worldview should not be confirmable. They confirm the reality of God. They confirm the reality of the soul. They confirm the hierarchy of the spiritual world. Father Amorth writes about instances where the entity being addressed confirms, sometimes bitterly, sometimes with what seems like rage, the authority of Christ over all created beings. They don't say it willingly. They say it because they are commanded in the name of that very authority, and they cannot lie when so commanded. This means the beings in question are not confused about the nature of reality. They are not atheists in the sense of being genuinely unsure about whether God exists. They know. They simply oppose. And because they know, they also know what the judgment means. They understand it clearly. In a sense, more clearly than most humans do. Honestly, when I understood this, I saw the world differently. I saw the casual indifference to spiritual reality in modern life, and I understood it as something much darker than mere ignorance. Father Amorth recounted specific exchanges during exorcisms where this fear manifested in unusual ways. In some cases, the entity became silent in a way it hadn't been before. In other cases, it pleaded. He noted that demons often plead during exorcisms. They plead not to be sent away. They plead for more time. They try to negotiate. They claim rights over the person they possess. But when the subject of the final judgment was mentioned directly, the pleading changed character. It was no longer negotiation. It was no longer strategy. It was raw. Father Amorth compared it to the reaction of someone who knows their sentence has already been handed down and there's nothing left to say. The defiance disappeared. He described situations where the entity, which had been loud and combative, suddenly became something else. Not cooperative, not friendly, but broken in a certain sense, aware of its position in a way that the confrontational aggression had been perhaps an attempt to hide. I felt empty. That's the only way I can describe it. Learning these things didn't make me feel powerful or protected. It made me feel the weight of everything. Father Ripperger has spoken extensively about the demonic experience of time and eternity. He points out something theologically interesting. Demons do not experience time in the same way humans do. They are spiritual beings, not bound to a physical body as we are. But the judgment is an event that, in a certain sense, even for them, is still in the future. The full execution of their punishment has not yet occurred. And that gap, that period between their fall and the full punishment, is the only space they have left. When the day of judgment closes that gap, nothing remains. This raises a natural question. Specifically, what aspect of the judgment are they afraid of? The exorcists who have addressed this point to several connected things. The first is the totality of it. Right now, demons have certain freedom. They can move, they can afflict people, they can operate. The judgment ends all of that permanently. No more time, no more access, no more chances to drag anyone down with them. The second is the presence of God without any mediation. For a being that has fundamentally rejected God and made that rejection the core of its existence, the unavoidable and unmediated presence of God is described in theological terms as the source of the deepest possible suffering. It's not torment imposed from outside. It is the inherent state of a being that by its own choice has become radically opposed to the source of all goodness and existence. The third is the public nature of it. The judgment in Christian theology is not a private event. It is the revelation of all things, every choice, every action, every hidden thing brought into the light. For demons, this means total exposure of what they are and what they have done before everything that exists. Father Amorth touched on this in his writings. Demonic entities have a kind of pride that is central to what they are. Their rebellion began, theologically, with pride. The total public revelation of the judgment is the ultimate reversal of that pride, a complete public, permanent exposure of what they chose to become. And here's what I didn't understand then. The references to the Virgin Mary produce one of the most intense reactions during an exorcism, and this connects directly to the judgment. In Catholic theology, Mary is associated with the final victory over evil. The image in Revelation of the woman clothed with the sun crushing the serpent is understood as pointing to both Mary and the ultimate triumph of the Church. Father Amorth described cases where the mere name of Mary produced violent reactions, more immediate and intense than even the name of Christ in some instances. The hatred demons have for Mary is tied to their awareness of her role in the economy of salvation and in the final outcome. She represents, in a certain sense, the promise of that final outcome. Father Ripperger describes Mary as a source of specific terror for demonic entities that goes beyond what most people would expect. Her role in the final defeat of evil is something these beings are aware of in a way that humans often are not. Now you might be thinking this is fascinating, but what does it mean for someone who is not an exorcist? It means several things. First, it means the spiritual world described in Christian theology is not a metaphor, not a vague set of comforting ideas. It is a specific structured reality with specific beings, specific conflicts, and a specific ending. The demons know it. They operate within it. Their behavior in exorcisms is consistent with a view of reality that takes seriously the idea that there is genuine spiritual warfare in which the outcome is ultimately determined, but in which human choices still matter. Second, it means the judgment is not a vague, soft concept. It is something the beings most directly opposed to it take with utter seriousness. They know what it means. They know it is coming. And the fact that they fear it suggests it is real in a way that goes beyond theological theory. Third, it offers a different framework for understanding human life. If there are beings of this nature who are aware of the judgment and fear it, and if human beings are in a sense the contested ground in this conflict, then the choices humans make in this life carry a weight that most people do not seriously consider. Father Amorth wrote about this directly. He said the greatest danger is not dramatic demonic possession. It is the gradual erosion of a person's spiritual awareness, their slow drifting away from the things the demons themselves know are real, until they reach the end of their life as unprepared for what follows as they could possibly be. That is the real goal of the demonic, not the spectacle of possession, the quiet, undramatic destruction of the soul's orientation toward its final destiny. Father Amorth also documented something specific about demonic activity at the moment of death. He described accounts of intensified demonic activity around dying people, particularly those who had lived without any serious spiritual orientation. Demons know that the moment of death is the last possible moment of conversion. After death, the choice is fixed, and so they are active trying to ensure that no final conversion happens, that there is no final act of trust or repentance that might change the trajectory of a soul they have been working on. What's striking about this is that again it reveals what they fear. If they work hardest to prevent souls from escaping at the last moment, it means they know what happens when souls do escape. They know the alternative. They know what they're working against. And they know that every soul that converts, even in the last second, is one more thing the judgment will reveal about the failure of their rebellion. Father Amorth said something near the end of his life that I carry with me every day. He said he never came out of an exorcism thinking about how powerful the demonic was. He always came out thinking about how extraordinary the mercy available to human beings is, and how tragic it would be to waste it. The beings he encountered knew everything. They knew God was real. They knew the soul was real. They knew the judgment was coming. They knew what it meant. And knowing all of that, they still chose what they chose. They keep choosing it now, every moment. They cannot unchoose it. The will is fixed, and yet the knowledge remains complete, perfect. They see the reality of things more clearly than any living human being, and they are on the wrong side of it, permanently, by their own choice. But human beings still have time. Human beings still have the capacity to choose. The things the demons know and are terrified of, human beings can still orient themselves toward. The information is available. The choice remains open. The gap remains open. And while the gap is open, what a person does with the time they have is the only thing that finally matters. I am 82 years old. I don't know how many more years I have. Maybe 10, maybe 5. Maybe I won't see next Christmas. But I know this much. The beings who understand reality most clearly are terrified of one thing above all else. And if they fear it, I should take it seriously. If you've made it this far with me, I want to ask you something. Think about what side of that day you want to be on. Really think about it. Don't let another day pass without considering it seriously. And if this old man's story has meant something to you, I'd be grateful if you'd share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment telling me what struck you most. Subscribe so you don't miss what I share next, because I'm not done talking yet, and neither, I suspect, are you done listening.